Hello, Internet. I'm Jackie Fox, and today we're going to continue our discussion about culture wars and the media. And in today's episode, how did I do that? And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a particular issue that I like to think of as paternalism. So, when we're talking about paternalism, we're going to be mainly talking about the liberal media. It does exist in the conservative media, but it does so in a different way. I think it's reacting to the light of the candle. That is interesting. And so the way that it works on a channel like Fox News is they will omit context that might be relevant to how you perceive a particular piece of information. It's by controlling the context of the story and what pieces of information you're given about it that they can determine, that they can kind of guide how you feel about it to match the narrative that they're trying to put forward. When you're talking about liberal media, it's kind of the same thing, but it's equally deceptive, and it's in line with a different set of values, which I find to be typically more palatable, at least in some ways, and especially when it comes to the culture war, because the right is always picking, well, not always, but relatively often picking some pretty horrendous positions, or at least, while most people may be reasonable, we certainly hear the loudest, and those people take it way too far. But when you're talking about this within the liberal media, I guess it's a little bit muddy, because from their perspective, they are doing a good thing, and it depends on whether you agree with their perspective to whether or not they're doing a good thing. So again, this one's kind of muddy, but it deals with a concept called information hazards. So, easiest example of an information hazard that you could have would be instructions to build a nuclear weapon. Like, especially if it was something that you didn't need, like, nation-state power to enact, but, like, just make an easy, dirty bomb that anybody could make in their garage. This would be super dangerous because, if that information were available to everyone, most people wouldn't do anything with it. Most people wouldn't even attempt to. But even if you did, those would be many, 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 many lives lost that could have been easily prevented by preventing people from having access to that particular set of information. So, with that in mind, the question that becomes relevant when we're addressing this topic is, when does it become important to draw that line? What things shouldn't people know that are true and worthy of knowing, right? So I think that the perfect case study for this is the liberal arc on masks. And, in part, this is... A lot of things about COVID are like, the science is evolving, and in the early part of this, the situation was evolving, and that is relevant. But the science never evolved on how big a COVID molecule was. And this is how we determine what type of mask is considered to be good protection. That doesn't mean that a lesser mask would not protect you. However, it means that, it's flawed, It's like, if there's a hole near the bottom of your condom, you're probably okay, but you might not be, and that is definitely relevant. That is effectively like a cloth mask, There's not like a big hole around the top where you're breathing out of, but it is certainly not the highest quality protection that is available on the market and the most appropriate. Now, the thing is, early on, this is a very high level of protection in N95 mask. And I was going to school for construction at the time. So, I'm going through all this, it's very front-ended with a lot of safety, right? So, we talk about environmental hazards and we talk about appropriate protection, and we have to learn which situation to reduce which masks. And given the size of the particle, it seemed readily apparent, that you should be using an N95 mask from the start. And there was a point where this was actually said to the public. I have to give the news media credit for at least saying this a couple of times. But it's been a long pandemic, and this narrative has been repeated over and over again. And through the nature of simulation and simulacra, through the nature of something becoming true and just being repeated so many times and simplified and reduced until a lot of the truth around it is lost, and therefore it can be manipulated by both sides, that's kind of where we got on masks. Because early on they said, you should be wearing N95 masks. The problem is that we have a very limited number of those. We have a president that is not willing to use the Defense Production Act to make more of them. So, especially if we're using these like in medical situations, biohazard situations, we need them for that. We can't have the public buying them. So the best that you can do right now is a cloth mask. And in fact, we'll give you instructions for making your own. Everybody, we don't have the production of that either, but we can ramp that up faster because it's not as particular an item as an N95 mask is. You can make these at home out of your old t-shirts if you wanted to. And as that went from that nuanced message that was originally broadcast to the simulacra of itself, which was wear a cloth mask for like 2 weeks and we'll get over this pandemic, just stay inside and wear a cloth mask when you go grocery shopping and we'll be through this. If you're not wearing a cloth mask, you're an evil person. If you're And like you could say, and I have said this throughout the pandemic, like it's not hard to wear, especially a cloth mask. Like they really, if you were wearing an N95 mask, even that's not going to restrict your breathing. It's a thicker weave, so it's going to provide more resistance. If you were wearing I think it's N98, which is what I use sometimes when I'm using spray paints, the one with the big canisters on them, that are for really fine particles. Those really restrict your breathing. But even then, you could wear one of those for hours and, you might be a little bit out of breath afterwards, but it's certainly nothing like any of the claims that some people were making about masks, which were ridiculous on the absolute other end of the spectrum. So, you've got this incorrect and public position that cloth masks are going to save us when, it's only kind of a good solution to the problem. And that leaves kind of a hole that became a culture war point, because this also started out reasonably on the right-wing side of the spectrum. Now, of course, there were the kind of people that like to be as out there as possible, as immediately as possible, that very rapidly derailed this whole conversation, even on the right. But originally on the right, the argument was like, hey man, I know this stuff because perhaps, there's a lot of your construction workers, the type of people who would actually wear an N95 mask and know exactly why one is used, happen to be on the right. And there were a lot of those people who were immediately critical of this idea to use cloth masks. It's just not effective as this wouldn't be acceptable on a job site if there was a known contaminant like COVID. This wouldn't be OSHA approved. So why is the CDC saying this? And then that just led, once you question an official source like that, once you take that genie out of the bottle, then people just go wild. But the thing is, it was never clear. And it wasn't necessarily the CDC's fault. It may have been Fauci's fault. He could have repeated, the specifics of this instead of reducing the message alongside the media. I understand why the media did this. They reduce every message to one critical element that fits their story, and everything else is opinion and speculation. That's how all of our news stories go. But Fauci, you're a man of science. You had the role of being the guy on television every afternoon telling us what we need to know about the pandemic. Why didn't you just... And it's paternalism. That is the answer, as far as I can tell, because they didn't trust us to be reminded of the fact that there was a better solution out there, and that some of these concerns on the other side were reasonable. Because they had to take kind of this absolutist position and because that's the way that the culture warps any story, through this sort of mimetic repetition of it until it has lost all connection to its original substance, which is the fact that, you know, this isn't the ideal mask, but we're doing it for now as we, you know, hope that our president uses the Defense Production Act, which is an idea that was first suggested as far as political candidates go during the primary by Bernie Sanders, and then within days parroted by Joe Biden. And to Joe Biden's credit, he actually has used the Defense Production Act to some limited success, and is part of the reason why we've seen this recent willingness to reveal the whole truth again. And see, like, this is the weird thing. Now that we finally have enough N95 masks to go around, all of a sudden, the reason for the paternalism has disappeared, and now they feel that they can trust us with the full story again, which makes it feel like it was truly intentional to derive that story of its meaning and reduce it to a simple and digestible point for the public. And, you know, I call it paternalism because this is how you treat a child, right? When a child asks you a question that is you deem too complex for their little mind to understand, you tell it to them in the dumbest way. And eventually, they find out. And then that fuels their teenage angst against you as they realize that Santa Claus isn't real and mommy and daddy have been lying to me for the last 7 years, and things like that. So, you know, and it has an equal and real reaction within the American public when this type of paternalism is employed by our media. And it's so strange to me to see this sudden shift back to, now that N95 masks are available, we're beginning to treat people who wear cloth masks the same way that we treated people who weren't wearing masks at all earlier in the pandemic. I mean, like, within a week of the CDC changing this position and this becoming suddenly, like, the liberal truth again, I was listening to NPR, which I have said at another point in this series is a great news source in general, even though, again, I don't always agree with the viewpoints that they put forward, but I do think that they are honestly and diligently trying to find the truth. They had a teacher on who was talking about the reasons why teachers were striking and staying out of work, and, you know, why this was kind of forcing school closures or just, you know, all the chaos in the school system that was happening at that particular moment. And she said this quote that just sticks in my head. She says, and, you know, these parents are sending their children to school without proper masks. And it's like, the CDC only redefined what a proper mask was about a week ago, and you're already harping on these children whose parents are doing the best they fucking can. And let me be 100% clear about the difference between the change between a mandate of wearing a cloth mask and what could be moving towards a mandate, or at least a cultural taboo against wearing cloth masks in favor of N95 masks. Cloth masks are easily manufactured, that's why we use them in the interim. That also makes them inexpensive. Also, a cloth mask is reusable because you can wash it. These two things are not true of N95 masks. They are much higher quality, and you know, they're going to be priced accordingly. And they are also meant to be disposable. Now, of course, you can wear them for weeks if you really want to risk it. But, you know, ultimately, if you do come in contact with COVID at some point, the mask is going to have it on there. You know, that's going to become a hazard. You really shouldn't use them for super extended periods of time like that. You know, I personally put mine on my dashboard and, like, hope that the sun bakes out any potential COVID in between uses. But my point is, if you really took the guidelines seriously for N95 masks, it would become very expensive. And especially if you're mandated to send your kid to school with an N95 mask every day, and if you are doing what is, very diligent and correct and disposing of it every day, that gets expensive fast. And there's an easy solution to this, and guess what it is? It's the same thing it was at the very beginning of this problem. The president needs to use the Defense Production Act more aggressively, because to be fair, Trump used the Defense Production Act too. He only used it to restore the supply of ham and bacon. I'm being completely serious. That's why he used the Defense Production Act. Everybody's yelling at him to use it. He's like, okay, I will. To get bacon back. I can't stand it. I need my bacon double cheeseburgers from McDonald's. Such an easy target. No wonder the media loved you. But in all seriousness, Biden could absolutely use the Defense Production Act to ramp up production to the point where the government could, send families like 5 a month at the very least. Like 1 per week and an extra for each kid in the household, maybe. Maybe we just do it for kids. We really want to care about protecting the kids. We really want to keep the schools open, which I think is beneficial for so many reasons. As long as it is within reason. And, if we want to be able to do these things, then shouldn't we make sure that the people who have had a hard pandemic so far, the people in the lower class, the working class parents, at the very minimum, honestly, we should be sending these to every house across America through the entirety or the remainder of the pandemic. But at the very least, we could send them to parents. That's all I'm saying. And again, well within our power. And the Defense Production Act isn't I'm pretty sure this is a thing that he can do like extra congressionally, is my point. So we don't even have to worry about the division in Congress. He could just do it more in the line of an executive order. And if I'm incorrect about that, feel free to correct me in the comments. And even if it does take more action than an executive order, it still should be done. Like this could have been a provision that could have been easily built into the Build Back Better, the infrastructure, any of that. And the closest that we have ever come to it was the 5 masks that we were supposed to get at the beginning of the pandemic through the post office that got shit canned by Trump. So it was a good idea then. It remains a good idea. And if the post office thought that they could do it during the Trump administration, I don't know why someone hasn't tried to push this idea under Biden. Because that is probably something you can find a way to do without an explicit bill. At least send 5, without a bill. Like, you might need actual funding, because again, they are not particularly cheap masks, but... So, the reason that I bring all that up is because it clearly shows you, now that we've gone through this whole arc on masks, of whether or not cloth is acceptable and what we should be doing, we see that a truth was, it wasn't denied, right? Not necessarily. You could... Usually a lot of the people who were saying, who were pointing out that like we were using the wrong type of masks, were also saying a bunch of other things, so it was really easy to just give them a blanket dismissal without addressing any of the points that they brought up, which is a very popular tactic, or just attacking the most stupid point and dismissing all of the rational ones, which is just a common tactic politically in general, regardless of our mass media. But, it was never really denied that this was the case, but they just kind of didn't tell us for a long time, or they stopped. Because again, they did tell us at first. This was a piece of information that I got through the news, because I was paying a lot of attention there at the very beginning. I was making videos about the pandemic there at the very beginning, so I was paying a lot of attention to what the media narrative was. But then it disappeared, and it disappeared for years, and then all of a sudden it's back. And it's almost a little bit jarring, especially when you consider the push throughout all of this against misinformation. And again, you know, like, COVID misinformation, especially the really severe stuff, that is an information hazard. Like, if you tell people that they can go out and buy horse paste, and don't give them any information about dosing, because it's very particular how you would dose for a human compared to a horse. You know, just disregarding the fact that, as far as we can tell, ivermectin only works in test tubes, which I'm not a test tube, you know, so I don't think it has been proven yet that there is any antiviral effects in you. But even if there was, if you told people that this thing that they could very easily misdose for themselves was an acceptable replacement for maybe finding a doctor that would prescribe it for you, like people like Joe Rogan have, that is definitely an information hazard, because some people are going to shit their intestines out. You know, but like, does that make it, and you know, like, the limits of free speech in America, the limits of what the government can get on to you about, really deals with information hazards. Like, yelling fire in a crowded theater is an information hazard. Especially if there isn't a fire, of course, but, you know, just because of the fear that people may be trampled in the situation that you would create through the panic that would ensue. And, you know, similarly, these things are being considered information hazards. So, and you know, the government is getting behind the push against misinformation, and the scary thing is that, you know, depending where we fall on this line of how much information we think that it is safe for the general public to consume, how much of the truth we're willing to give them, and it is appropriate to give them. Because I do agree that we should limit information hazards where we can, and, you know, I didn't have to tell you how to make a bomb in the middle of this video to prove the point that information hazards exist, so I didn't. You know, stuff like that, but, you know, having a strong state censorship system is not something that I find to be a future to look forward to. And, you know, first they came for the socialists, and I said nothing because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the No, I'm sorry. But, like, you see my point. Like, if a thing is bad for a group of people, if a thing is bad for people in general, but it's only being deployed against one group of people, that doesn't make it more acceptable because they are not you. You know what I mean? Because, and like, even if you think, well, you know, it's Biden's doing it. I think he has a good compass for this. However, like, maybe Biden's worldview, or what you imagine it to be, matches yours, so you trust this administration to do it. But this administration is going really badly, and what happens if Trump or, like, Ron DeSantis wins next election? You know, do you trust them to determine what misinformation is? I don't think you would. I think you could see how that could get scary. So if you recognize that, then if it's not good for the goose, not good for the gander, is what I'm saying. Like, you know, these same things that you were cheering for now could be weaponized against you under a different administration. And that is that's the thing that the partisan aspect of the culture war makes us forget. Because, you know, the way to get someone to vote against their interest is to make them hate someone else, and then say, this thing that you're afraid of happening to you, we're going to do it to them, but it's okay because we're not going to do it to you. But when you open that door and you set that precedent, then you're next. Or you could be. You can't escape that possibility, and that is absolutely something you should consider when thinking about the trend of the way things are going. So, that's what I have to say about that. I mean, to a certain point, like, you know, there can be a point to paternalism, and it's kind of it could get bad, you know, depending on the level of censorship. If things were to get Orwellian, that would not be That would not be acceptable. But to a certain degree, it's, I guess, like, they're doing their best. They're trying to make the right decision for us. I disagree that we cannot make our own decisions when given appropriate information. I mean, you know, if you start the misinformation thing, you know, you let the genie out of the bottle, then you're not credible anymore. And you know, that creates a problem when you could just be wholly honest and head this thing off to the past. So while I think that paternalism could get bad, could go to an Orwellian place, is the beginning of an Orwellian instinct when we see it expressed by our centralized federal government. And especially by the news media, which is similarly kind of nationalized and not nationalized. I'm not sure that would help as much as you know, that might just shortcut us right to the problem I'm talking about. But you know, it is nationwide. It is a nationwide entity instead of a local entity in the same way, and you know, the same way a collaboration of nationwide power, and that gives it that nationwide influence and ability to manipulate the flow of information, and that is an awesome responsibility. And I just, you know, again, no matter what type of mask you're wearing, I think that it's a good decision. It does help, and I think that for the most part, the liberal narrative on masks, double masking was kind of funny, but I guess that's kind of like a cheap N95, because part of N95 is that it's layered, because no individual layer is going to have, you know, a good enough weave to stop something like a COVID. You have to get multiple ones like layered behind each other to really be able to accomplish that. It was kind of a way of making like a more homemade version of an N95 mask out of cloth, but I think generally that narrative was on point. But it bothers me the way that it was manipulated, and the way that, you know, an important part of why things are the way they are was kind of left out of the popular story for a while, and how that left room open for reasonable skepticism to metastasize into an anti-mask movement. And the whole issue just underlines this whole responsibility that the media industry has to both clearly convey what is important to its audience, and to credibly convey that as well. So, I think that's about all I have to say about that. I will see you in the next video.